Starting with a full container, milk is poured 3 times. First, 1/2 of the milk is poured out, then 1/3 of what remains, and finally 1/4 of the remaining milk. After the third pouring, what fraction of the full container of milk remains? Well, each pouring is essentially an independent event, so to calculate the remaining amount, we need to calculate the fraction that remains after each pouring. And 3 pourings, I'll call those fractions R1, R2, R3. The product of all 3 should give us the total fraction that remains after all 3 pourings. So R1, if 1/2 is poured out, that means 1 minus 1/2 fractionally remains after the first pouring. The second pouring, we're told 1/3 of what remains will be poured out. So that means 1 minus 1/3 will remain after pouring out 1/3. And lastly, our third pouring, we're told 1/4 of the remaining milk is poured out, which means there'll be 1 minus 1/4 left or remaining after the third pouring. So this essentially, calculating each of the values in parentheses, is 1 minus 1/2 is 1/2 times 1 minus 1/3 is 2/3, the remaining fraction after the second pouring, times 1 minus 1/4 is 3/4 or 3/4, which implies our total remaining fraction after all 3 pourings should be 1 times 2 times 3 divided by 2 times 3 times 4, and in fact we can see the 2's and the 3's cancel, so really all we're left with is 1/4. So the amount of remaining milk will be 1/4 of the original total left. And it's important to remember that each fraction, R1, R2, is based on the amount that was remaining prior to that pouring, not a fraction of the original amount. And the wording of the problem is critical because it indicates the fractional amount poured out from the remaining at any given point.